But to another issue that also got a run in last night's debate, and again today, this idiotic accusation by Labor, blaming the Morrison government for what it calls the greatest foreign policy disaster since World War II, bigger than Vietnam. China's new security deal, the Solomon Islands, which lets China's naval ships dock and re-equip within missile range of Brisbane. And it also lets Chinese troops come in to protect Chinese assets with permission. Now, the Solomon Prime Minister says, well, don't worry, this deal does not mean that China can build an actual naval base on the Solomon Islands.
Let me assure the people of Solomon Islands that we entered into an arrangement with China with our eyes wide open.
Well, I wouldn't trust that man as far as I could throw him. China does want a naval base there, and I'm betting they could twist a few more arms to get one in time. Like I say, in missile distance of our east coast and threatening our shipping lanes. Now, Labor says this deal is a massive fail by the Morrison government, which didn't send Foreign Minister Marise Payne to the island to just stop this deal. I don't know, by how? Smiling at them nicely? I don't know. But what would Labor have done instead?
We'd actually not go missing. We'd turn up. Where has Peter Dutton turned up?
Honestly, someone should tell Albo, look, you're going well with this passion, but just chill a little on the excitement there. Now, Labor also says, this is part of its big plan to have stopped this, the government could have stopped China by getting this toehold in the Solomons by doing more about climate change. How about that? I mean, seriously, if the Solomon Islands, they're so upset with us on global warming, why have they just cut a deal instead with the world's biggest emitter by far? And their emissions are growing while we're at least cutting ours. Doesn't make sense. And by the way, why is Labor saying this is Australia's fault, just Australia's fault, that the Solomons signed this deal, when this deal was also opposed by Solomon's opposition party, by New Zealand, and most importantly by the United States, and everyone failed to stop it? Now, why would that be? Now, if you really want a reason for the Solomon Islands letting in the Chinese Navy, don't blame Scott Morrison, blame Chinese bribes. In fact, our Defence Minister and the Prime Minister both today hinted at just that.
I mean, you asked a question about bribery or corruption. We don't pay off. We don't bribe people. The Chinese certainly do, and there are some things that we can do. We can provide support for, but we can't win a deal at the end of the day if somebody is relying on a corrupt payment.
We're dealing with an autocratic nation that is not playing by the normal rules in how they seek to influence other nations in our region.
If you want more detail about what exactly they're talking about with corruption, read my column today in the News Limited papers. But if you want even more, keep watching, because joining me is Peter Kenilorea. He is an opposition MP in the Solomon Islands and chairs this Foreign Relations Committee. Thank you so much for your time. Why do you think your Prime Minister signed this deal with China?
Well, for us, we see this as not benefiting the country at all, but something that we might be benefiting him and his government, particularly. They have agendas that they need to do. One big one for us is the planned extension of Parliament life from 4 to 5 years, which is hugely unpopular here in Solomon Islands. And in order to push those agendas, I think they might need some support in terms of backing to do that.
I'm picking up that when you say backing, and I know there's always defamation laws, you might mean money. We've seen reports that Chinese funds controlled by the Prime Minister himself were used to bribe politicians into backing him last December to stay in office. We had one MP, Silas Tausinger, say that he and at least 3 others were offered $44,000 of Chinese money to support him. We had relatives of politicians, meanwhile, given Chinese scholarships. And an advisor to the Premier of Malaya province said Chinese companies were even housing government ministers in gated estates with armed Chinese guards. What influence has Chinese money had on politics in your country?
It has been great influence. We know that the logging industry is one that has its market in China. So while the loggers themselves might not be Chinese, we know that they export directly to China our logs. So that particular industry has a big hold over politics in Solomon Islands and have been doing so for a few decades now.
Given all this Chinese money going around into some people's pockets, given that your opposition party has fought this Chinese deal, given that the United States is against this deal and didn't get its way, the New Zealand government's against it, none of that has worked to stop this deal. What difference do you think Australia would have made if it had tried even harder to stop it?
Yeah, I think it's good to put this in context as well. I mean, there's always the advantage of hindsight that we can go back and have a look. But I think we're dealing with a government here in Solomon Islands who's got a very good friend in Beijing, and then they're kindred partners. So they work together well. For us here, and my own observation is that this government is looking to protect its status here in the Solomon Islands, and there's a willing partner to whatever China's plans are to do that. So while we have our friends, our traditional partners, this government has shown now and again to say one thing and do the other. Before the switch, for example, the switch I mean from Taiwan to China in 2019, the Prime Minister himself at that time, the last Parliament, in 2019, spoke with the former president, the Vice President of the US, Mike Pence. That was one of the few calls ever, I think, in the history of Solomon Islands, where Mike Pence invited him to Washington to see him before any such moves for a switch. There was an undertaking, sure, I'll see you after the General Assembly in 2019. And then as soon as the call was over, effectively the switch happened. Saying one thing and doing the opposite is something that is really well known here. Taiwan, right before the day before the switch, they didn't know about that. They were giving assurances that they were going to be our partner right until the end. So this is a government that has shown that it's willing to just straight out tell lies to gain its own agenda. And I think that fits in very well with the new friend that they have in Beijing.
Doesn't sound like our Foreign Minister turning up and showing her face would have made any difference. Just finally, you mentioned the government can't be trusted. The Prime Minister has said there will not be a Chinese military base in the Solomon Islands from this deal. Do you trust him long term?
No, I don't. I don't, because I personally have letters from him during the switch where he wrote to me saying that the report for the Foreign Relations Committee will add on to the considerations that they will make as the executive branch of government for the switch. It didn't take long. Our reports, our hearings were still continuing in Parliament, and they made the switch even without our own report. So I don't believe a word that he says in terms of how he leads the country going forward, because it's been proven now and again that what he says doesn't match with the actions.
Well, very sobering analysis. Peter Kenilorea, thank you so much indeed for your time.